All right. Hopefully, we are going live here on YouTube. My name is Kelly Doherty, and I'm here with Karen Arnold, and we are the Grief Ladies. And so, if you are not familiar with us, we'll give you a little bit of background about the Grief Ladies, and then we are going to answer some common questions about grief and loss. And so, Karen, you want to share a little bit about yourself and about Grief in Common?
Sure. So, my name is Karen Arnold. I've been in the field of grief and loss for close to 25 years, just like Kelly. I keep saying that I'm getting older, so it's obviously more than that now, I guess. But that's a nice, easy number. Worked in hospice for a very, very long time. About 10 years ago, started the website Grief in Common, which is a community of connection for people who are grieving. From that, started to do more virtually in terms of support groups, individual support, things like that, education. Kelly and I found each other through a book that Kelly will tell you about in a moment. Where we're both co-authors. Kelly was the lead author. And we just really connected on that and found that we had really similar approaches and philosophies to grieving. And we were kind of paralleling with our work, and it was like, let's find the intersection here and take what we're both doing and make it something a little bit bigger and broader, and put it out there, to a larger group. So we are currently growing a Facebook community, which has really been pretty great, how fast that has been growing. And I think that's been a great resource, and that there's a lot of good things happening there. And we also have a book coming out soon. So I'll let Kelly tell you more about that.
Yeah, so I'm Kelly Doherty. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a fellow in thalassology, which is the study of death, dying, and bereavement. And I, like Karen, have been doing this for about 25 years, actually, probably longer than that. I started volunteering in for hospice probably back in 1996. So when I was just 16 years old, I started this journey that I'm on and have continued. I have a private practice where I specialize in working with children and adults with grief and loss, and that's in upstate New York, right outside of Albany and Saratoga. And also have the Center for Informed Grief, where my goal really is to help therapists and school personnel become more grief informed. And as Karen said, I was the lead author of the book called The Grief Experience: Tools for Acceptance, Resilience, and Connection. And it's a collaborative book. So that meant I didn't have to write the whole thing, which was wonderful. And there was 25 of us that did the book together. And I had to find authors that wanted to say yes to me and do it with me. And Karen was one of those. And as Karen said, we hit it off. I think our past hospice experience as bereavement counselors really just helped that process, and just the way we view grief. I always say, like, I think Karen and I have a lot of similarities with the way we do our work and the way we think about grief and loss. And it's also just, I think there's some misconceptions out there. People always say there's no right or wrong way to grieve. And while that is sort of true, I guess, there's a lot of things you shouldn't do when you're grieving that are not helpful. But Karen and I also know from all of these years of doing this work that there are actual things that help you, things that can help you on your grief journey. And so that's where the Grief Ladies came out of, is wanting to be able to share our grief framework, which we created, which is based on the word grief. G, grounding, which is talking about eating, moving our body, sleeping, all the kind of the basics. R for rebuilding, which is about creating routines and structures. Even when we're grieving, just having even a small little thing to focus on or to do can keep us going. I for interacting, dealing with relationships and communication. And then E for evolving, which is about dealing with some of the roadblock emotions, which is like the anger and the guilt, and also dealing with how your self esteem is impacted when you're grieving. And then F is for finding, which is about who am I now? Where do I want to go? How do I move forward without leaving my loved one behind? And how do I stay connected to them? So we have this framework. And so everything in the Grief Ladies is based on this framework. So we have our podcast that comes out, new episodes every Wednesday. You can check it out on YouTube or on any podcast platform and listen to talking about our different letters. So each week we highlight a different letter. We also have, like Karen said, our Facebook community, and we have a book coming out. So Karen, you want to share a little bit about our book?
Yeah,
Our
so
first one?
it's the first yeah, so we're gonna be doing a whole series. It's the first in our Grief Brain reader series. So we are trying to, I think, honor, what it is to be a grieving person in terms of focus, and attention span. That ability to read can be very difficult. So we're creating a series of books that are meant to be very accessible, easy to pick up, easy to come back to, and hopefully that you get kind of like that quick burst of information that can be reassuring and helpful, right in the moment without having to spend hours and hours, finally getting to the meat of it. We're just trying to give you everything right there. So it's the first year after loss, and we are talking about what to expect during that time. As we said, as we worked in hospice, this is the kind of thing that we wish we had, to hand to people, to be like, listen, here, just read this book, and you're going to understand. I've mentioned before, I feel like people are coming to my groups and coming to support earlier and earlier. People are understanding that grief is something that needs to be addressed. And I find that they're not wanting to wait too long or to get sort of too far behind, or maybe even to develop some bad habits through that. So we're trying to help them understand some of the ways that they could expect their relationships, their work, even things like their sleep, their diet, all of that can be kind of touched and impacted by early grief. Because what it looks like in the first year is going to be different. It's, constantly changing. And we're not putting timelines, anything. So we're not saying, oh, it's month one this, month two this, but we are trying to show sort of the progression of what you can expect. Because expectations are a huge part of the grieving process. And one of the reasons why I think people feel very scared about the whole thing and feel very unfamiliar to themselves, and also incredibly disappointed, in people and sometimes even in themselves. So, we're wanting to normalize all of that. I don't know. I mean, I hope it doesn't sound silly to say, but it's almost like a book that we hope could feel like a little bit of a hug. Like, okay, like you've got this, just take your time, go through this bit by bit, try not to get too far ahead of yourself. I feel like people keep their expectations of themselves very, very, very high. And we're trying to say, listen, this is different right now. All the rules are different. And I know we have some questions to talk about today, so some of that may get addressed through that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're here to just answer some common everyday grief questions that we hear and want to give you kind of our insights. And so I'm going to start it off and ask you. Um, oh, actually, Karen, you're going to ask me. See, where
It
this is what happens when we go live.
oh, that's okay. All right. Well, so we were kind of talking about what we think some common questions are, what we think people would like to know. So, yes, Kelly, I will be asking you first. Is it normal to feel exhausted from grief?
Yes.
All right, that's
Very
it. Good.
much
We'll keep
so.
going.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. I think that is one of the things that shock people the most is the level of exhaustion that comes. And I've always said you can sleep great and be doing well with your sleep and still wake up exhausted. Grief is very physically, mentally, emotionally exhausting. And it really can impact us in more ways than you think. There's so much happening in our body when we're grieving and in our brain. Our brain is trying to make sense of what's happening. Our body is having different responses, like our inflammation levels may be higher. We may be having some heart changes because we're grieving. We miss our loved ones. And because of all that, exhaustion is extremely common. And honestly, I think to be expected, but most people are pretty shocked by that, especially people who have not experienced grief before. They're like, I can't believe how tired I am. I just want to sleep all the time. And it doesn't help even.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because we're also talking about different types of exhaustion. There, for some people who aren't sleeping, they're experiencing, the restlessness that sort of comes the next day with not getting a good night's sleep. But there's also the mental exhaustion. I say to people all the time, because, sometimes grieving people are maybe taking it a little bit slow in the very, very early days, going back to that first year. They may not be at work, for a couple of weeks, or there just may be times that they would say to themselves, like, I'm hardly doing anything and I'm so tired. And the way I always explain it is, you could just be sitting in a room, staring out the window and just do that all day. And at the end of it, you will be absolutely wiped out. Grief is just that exhausting. I think it's like, I don't know, it's like almost that cartoon thing of like the machine that's constantly running. There's just so much that you're trying to learn and process. I mean, grief is very much like a learning, that is happening in sort of this new life and what's expected of me. This is one of the more frustrating symptoms, I think, of being a grieving person, because you're also being expected to do quite a bit, whether that is settling the estate or cleaning out or making phone calls. So this exhaustion is the physical, the mental, and it also kind of seeps in a little bit to that lack of motivation too, that like I don't feel like doing anything either. So there's so much in the way this can kind of cycle for a person, and it's super frustrating if we're used to being doers and getting things done.
Yes, absolutely. And so, yes, is it normal to feel exhausted from grief? Absolutely.
Yeah.
You are not alone.
Yep.
So, our next question is for Karen, and is, why does grief sometimes get harder before it gets easier?
Well, yeah, this is a really confusing one and a hard one, and one for somebody who is really, really new in grief. I want to like be careful with, because it's like, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. This is already so hard. This is going to get harder. It gets different. I mean, that's for sure. And in the earliest days of it, we do have things to do and focus on. All that I just mentioned, the phone calls and the settling of the estate and that to-do list that you have, as hard as all of that can be, it is something that kind of keeps you focused and driven, and it gives you a little bit of a movement maybe attached with it. Whereas with time, there's less of that to do. So it's like, oh, now I'm just grieving. What is that supposed to look like? And what does that mean? Also around that time, the reality is sinking in, the finality may be sinking in for some in a different way. The fog is lifting, and support is starting to pull back as people go, about their normal lives. So it's just like a perfect storm of things all happening at the same time. But it's confusing, and it's kind of scary for a person to think that they're declining.
Yeah. And I was at an event a couple of years ago, and I had a discussion with a local medium. And she said she found that most people came to her around 8 months.
Hmm.
And so her theory was that she thinks that that's sometimes when the reality is setting in more. And I think it's sometimes, she's right. I think that sometimes the fog is starting to lift that you mentioned. Some of that brain fog that we have in early grief starts to lift. It doesn't mean it's gone, right? It can still happen in the second year. We're
Sure.
not saying that there's timelines when we preface early grief or whatever, because we know grief isn't something we get over, it's something we learn to live with. But those I see, at least with my clients, there are some things 6 to 8 months, some of that fog starts to lift, the reality does set in, and it becomes more real. And or maybe it's a new season, right? Spring, Karen and I always talk about spring and fall, I think, are probably some of the harder season changes. Spring, because it's like the new birth, everything coming alive again. You're outside more, you want to do more. Can't really hibernate, especially when we live in the Northeast and it's cold and miserable during the winter. And or then the fall, right? The leaves start changing. It's almost like the beginning of the holiday season. And so maybe that correlates with also that 6 to 8 month time. And so it can hit you differently. And so maybe it's a birthday or an anniversary. All these things can bring up different layers of grief and could make it harder.
Yeah, I think it's just the fact that there's so many other things in life that time can help with, that we just assume this is going to be like that too. If I haven't been well, I just need time to heal and to feel better. And we can kind of hope there's going to be a steady progression. And this just follows a whole different sort of timeline. And I think most people would think it's up and down, up and down. Kelly, I think you and I have the unique experience of being very immersed in the grief with some people, but also having that step back. If I talk to somebody once a week, every other week, something like that, or if I'm seeing monthly in a group, it's like, okay, I'm talking to them. It's like, oh yeah, it's been okay. I've had a good couple of days. I was able to get some things done. And I talk to them a week later, they're like, I am not doing well at all. Maybe something precipitated it, but maybe it didn't. And then that's even more confusing. So I think we really could almost chart and see that up and down, but people who are grieving absolutely feel it themselves.
Yeah, and I also want to mention that I know for me, I've had several clients, and Karen, I think you have as well, that they wind up coming to us 5 years later, six
Oh
years
yeah.
later, sometimes even more, because maybe they've had another loss. I've been getting a lot of messages about compounded losses recently and people seeking support. But also, I think sometimes people think they're doing okay, and they're going through the motions, they're doing what they're supposed to do. And then their grief kind of catches up with them. It's a bit of a delayed grief response sometimes. And so they're 5 years in and they're like, why is this harder this year?
Right. Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that too, because I think that that is a pretty common experience for people that they, maybe kind of make their way through, but then something else happens, or maybe they find that they're having challenges in their relationship or at work or something. And they're like, what the heck is this? And it's like, oh, this is grief. This is like maybe grief that I didn't get to address at the time. Sometimes, a significant loss happens. I think grieving can be a luxury, as weird as that sounds, like to really be with it and to process it. And if we are, let's say, caring for a surviving parent after our parent dies, or we have health issues of our own, or maybe other things, I mean, there's just a million reasons why you may not have that chance. And then it shows up.
Yeah.
And then that's really confusing because you're like, this was however much time ago.
Yeah. I just mentioned that just this week to somebody because they're in the transition phase of going back into work. They've been fortunate to have some time off. And with raising kids and all that, I said, My biggest concern for you is now that you're making this transition is to make sure you have that planned grief time,
Hmm.
because otherwise it's going to pile and it's going to bubble and it's going to come out sideways. So making sure that with your new schedule that you can kind of build in some planned grief time.
Yeah. Yeah. We need to do a whole thing on planned grief time.
We do,
I just
absolutely.
realized that because I was just talking to somebody about that today too,
Yeah.
but that's to help avoid it just popping out of nowhere to try to have some intention and, maybe have a little bit of a say in what your grief looks like. So, all right. Well, Kelly, as always, we could probably go on forever. So I will now officially ask you the next question, which is there a right way to grieve? You're getting all the yes or no questions. I just realized.
No. Done. No, there isn't a right way to grieve, right? And as I kind of started with our live today was saying that was there is no right or wrong way to grieve, but we do know that there are things that help. And I think that's what we're trying to kind of address and bring up is that there are things that do help somebody when they're grieving. And grief is going to look different for everybody because relationships are different, right? And and people's personalities are different, routines are different. So everybody's grief is going to look different. Now, I will say there is no stages. I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute. There are no stages of grief. It isn't linear. It isn't predictable. Not everybody that goes through grief has depression. Not everybody that goes through grief feels anger. It's different. And I think it's about finding things that work for you and finding ways to stay connected to your loved one. If continuing bonds feels right, and what that means is how do you stay connected with them? Do you talk to them? Do you do something in honor of them? Do you run a 5K race in memory of them? Do you start a foundation? Finding what works for you. So I wish that it was this neat thing to like just do this and this. We do know there are things that absolutely help, right? Our framework is built on that. And it is about, making sure you're sleeping, eating, moving your bodies. You want to make sure you're maybe limiting your alcohol consumption. You want to, Karen and I have talked about all the time. Like sometimes people wind up drinking too much, or they start using drugs too much, or they shop too much, right? They're on Amazon. Somebody said the other day, their grief buying experience. And one of my clients shared something really funny. She's like, this has got to be the weirdest grief buying purchase ever. And I was like, yeah, I think it is. It was a very unique thing that I won't share because it's too unique.
Okay.
So there isn't a right way to grieve, but there are things that definitely help.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, you kind of were touching on it a bit, the things that hurt. I mean, that's the one thing that I talk to people about a lot is that we form habits so quickly, and we have mental habits that we start as soon as the loss happens, in the story that we're telling ourselves, the guilt, that we're carrying, the things that we kind of keep ruminating on and coming back to. But through that as well, I think we also develop some coping habits. And what we would try to encourage is to be developing as healthy a habits as you can along the way, but for different reasons. This isn't like about, weight loss or anything like that. This is like recognizing how we were talking about energy before, and exhaustion, and how tiring it is to be a grieving person and to not be doing things that are going to be detrimental to you. We all have the experience of trying to seek short-term comfort, with short-term solutions that can cause more problems down the road. Like you said, the drinking, feeling miserable the next day, or if we're eating too much. And I've had plenty of people are like, I don't know what happened. I like gained 30 pounds, out of nowhere. So, having that experience, and then it's like, now I've got another problem I've had this significant loss. Now I've got something else I need to figure out. So it's like we're just trying to not create more challenges for ourselves. So in the like right way, we're not talking about the wrong way necessarily, but we do know there's things that are just going to make it so much harder for yourself. So try not to do those, if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So our final question is, what's one thing you tell someone on day one of grief?
Well, outside of the, of course, any type of condolences or things like that. I mean, if they're very specifically ready and looking for grief support, I guess at that time, um, the one thing, Kelly, I can't do one thing. That just made it harder. I just realized that makes it a 10 times harder question, just the one thing. Okay. I guess to focus on the basics. That would be the one thing that a person needs to recognize, because we jump ahead so far. My family likes to fish, and I always talk about when you let out too much fishing line and it gets so far away from your boat, you need to reel back in. We kind of mentally do that with our thoughts. Just let it drift and drift and go too far. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. You really just need to be taking care of yourself physically, like right away, as much as you are able to do that, prioritizing it, giving yourself permission. Maybe priority is the thing. It's like you're going to need to prioritize yourself through a lot of this. Um, I would also tell somebody that patience. So I know that's more than one thing, but give yourself patience, give yourself grace, be mindful of your expectations, focus on the basics, and day one, make sure you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah, and I loved what you told me in my own grief experience. It was that it's okay sometimes to give yourself permission. Permission to have a day where you sit on the couch and you binge watch Netflix.
Mhm.
And once you give yourself that permission, I think it takes away that, like, oh, I should be doing more or whatever it is. It's an understanding that you're just taking care of yourself. So, giving yourself permission to find that space to take care of yourself, to say no to things, to say yes to things that feel right, to change your mind at the last minute. So I think for me, it's a bit of permission
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's recognizing that the rules change too, because like I just spoke to someone this morning and she was so frustrated with herself because she didn't have like an important grocery item in the house. And she's like, how could I not have gotten this? Like, I woke up this morning to make breakfast, and like, and she was disappointed with herself and frustrated with herself. And so really understanding that like this is different. This is not like any other part of life before, where all of that sort of orderly, taking care of things, being on top of things. I think most grieving people, they're just kind of getting up, getting through the day and trying to do it again tomorrow. It's not going to be pretty, orderly, organized. It doesn't have to be. Like it really is. We don't want our whole lives to be something that we just get through, but the early first days, absolutely. That's all you can do is just try to get through them.
yeah, absolutely. And it is why our very first book is The First Year After Loss.
Yeah.
And so that will be coming out on Tuesday, June 16th on Amazon. And so check it out. Like Karen mentioned, is part of our Grief Brain Reader series. So it's going to be really easy to read, digestible, super, you could probably read it in one sitting, or if you need to, because you're grieving brain, the way it works, one section at a time.
Yeah.
And so we'll be sharing more about that, but definitely check it out. If you are grieving and are looking for additional support, check out the Grief Ladies Facebook community. I will always highlight Karen and the work that she does through her program through her website, Grief and Common. She does offer groups that are for partner loss and for what other groups do you have going on this month, Karen?
Well, my two kind of like flagship are loss of parent, loss of spouse. That's the population that I've just, traditionally, maybe through hospice, worked with most often. But then I always offer a type of special seminar that would be a general grief for everybody, but on a specific topic. This month it is about trying to understand the difference between anxiety, depression, and grief, because there's a
Mhm.
blur, between all of those. And I know grieving people are often worried about where they fit into that. So yeah, I'm always trying to, as I said, have the ongoing supports, but then different things for people who want to pop in, here and there, and then, individual supports as well.
Yeah, so check out Grief and
Yeah.
Common if you're looking for additional resources. Make sure you listen to our podcast, Grief Ladies. New episodes come out every Wednesday. And stay tuned for our book, The First Year After Loss. And if you're interested in more, you want to sign up for our newsletter, so make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you'll stay up to date on all of our newest videos. And our website is griefladies.com. And you can also find on there some workshops that we have that you can download and watch at your own pace, as well as some grief journals, lots of different resources that are really reasonably priced to be able to support you on your grief journey. So thanks for watching and take care.
Thanks, Kelly.